A royal vault breached by a thief. Welcome to Silent Case Files. I am your host, Halworth. Comment where you're watching from. Your presence elevates mystery. It was on a chilly November evening, one of those evenings when London seems wrapped in a silken fog of mystery, that the doors of the King's Royal Treasury exhibition opened for its exclusive preview gala. Society's finest drifted beneath the chandeliers like jeweled moths drawn toward wealth's brightest flame. The exhibition hall glowed with polished marble, velvet-lined cases, and the hushed reverence reserved for objects of immense historical value. At the very heart of this curated splendor stood the crown jewel of the night, the Aurelian scepter, an artifact of staggering antiquity and even greater legend. Forged in Byzantium, tipped with amber, the color of trapped sunlight, and valued at well over £1 million, it was secured behind triple reinforced glass within the King's Vault display chamber. For tonight only, the public, and a carefully selected array of dignitaries, would gaze upon it before it was transported to permanent residence at the British Royal Collection. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing near the buffet table and glancing with mild discomfort at a canapé topped with something unidentifiably French, could not help but remark to himself that such gatherings always seemed to attract trouble. He had accompanied his old friend, Monsieur Hercule Poirot, at the detective's insistence that one must occasionally take nourishment for the soul. Mon ami, even if the body must endure London's interpretation of haute cuisine. Poirot himself mingled politely at the edges of the crowd, impeccably dressed in his evening suit, mustaches trimmed to the sharp perfection of a calligrapher's flourish. Yet even in leisure, Poirot's eyes missed nothing. Hastings noticed it too, the faint undercurrent of tension rippling among the guests. There was the enigmatic curator, Dr. Rosalind Ainsworth, tall and composed, though her fingers drummed a subtle rhythm against a champagne glass. Not far off stood Lord Montgomery Radcliffe, a patron of the arts with a reputation whispered about more than spoken aloud. His gaze lingered on the scepter longer than seemed natural. And moving through the crowd with feline grace was Miss Eliza Trent, a journalist known for her bold exposé, invited tonight for reasons that seemed unclear and perhaps unwise. At precisely 8 o'clock, a hush fell. Dr. Ainsworth stepped forward to deliver her welcoming remarks, her voice echoing against the gilded cornices. Hastings found himself half listening, his attention drifting between the assembled guests and Poirot, who watched the proceedings with the serene focus of a chess master studying his opponent's opening gambit. "And finally," Ainsworth declared, "we unveil the centerpiece of this extraordinary collection, the Aurelian scepter, symbol of sovereignty and one of the most astonishing survivals of ancient craftsmanship." A theatrical flourish of lights drew every eye to the glass enclosure, but the gasp that followed was not one of admiration. The case was empty. Ainsworth froze mid-sentence. Lord Radcliffe staggered back, a hand pressed to his chest. Miss Trent's pen slipped from her glove. The crowd rippled into chaos. Whispers, cries, the frantic clinking of spilled champagne. Poirot did not move. Hastings could see at once the subtle tightening of the detective's expression, a narrowing of gleaming eyes, a slight lift of the chin, as though he had been expecting something to disturb this otherwise orderly night. Ainsworth's voice finally broke through the commotion. This cannot be. The display was sealed not 15 minutes ago. Security, lock all exits immediately." Uniformed guards rushed to obey. Metal shutters thundered down over the main entrance. Guests exchanged uneasy glances as they realized they were not merely witnesses. They were suspects within a closed circle, now sealed inside the great hall with the scene of the crime. Poirot stepped forward at last, his calm a striking contrast to the rising panic. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said softly, yet somehow his voice carried to every corner of the room, "I would advise that we remain very still. When order is restored, the truth, comme toujours, will begin to reveal itself. Hastings gave him a bewildered look. Poirot, the scepter was there moments ago. How in blazes? But Poirot's eyes were already roaming the room, studying faces, postures, the delicate interplay of guilt, fear, indignation, and something else, something that glimmered beneath the surface like a hidden shard of light. "Do not ask how, mon ami," Poirot murmured. "Ask instead who wished the scepter to vanish, and why they believed this was the perfect moment for it." For the first time since the lights had ignited the empty case, Hastings felt a prickle of unease. Somewhere among this elegant throng stood a thief bold enough to strike under the watchful gaze of London's elite, and cunning enough to think they could escape detection. But they had not counted on Hercule Poirot. The murmurs within the vaulted chamber swelled like the rising crest of a troubled sea. Yet Poirot seemed untouched by the atmosphere of panic. He moved with quiet precision, as though the chaos itself formed a veil through which he alone could clearly see. Hastings followed close behind, noting the detective's subtle glances. Never flurried, never wandering, always purposeful. Ainsworth approached them first, her composure fracturing at the edges. "Monsieur Poirot, I'm not sure how this could have happened. The case was locked, sealed, and monitored." Poirot inclined his head gently. "You are distressed, mademoiselle. This is natural. But you will permit that I must ask questions, yes? And you will answer them as calmly as you can." She swallowed hard and nodded. "Anything. Whatever you need." "Then you will tell me," Poirot began softly, "who had access to the display before the gala commenced." Ainsworth hesitated, and Hastings noticed her hands tremble. "Only a very small team. Myself, 2 conservation specialists, the head of security, and Lord Radcliffe. He insisted on early inspection due to his position as the exhibition's primary benefactor." Poirot raised a single eyebrow. "Ah, then did this inspection please him?" "I would not say pleased." Ainsworth's voice faltered. He objected to the positioning, claimed the lighting did not flatter the scepter. He requested changes which took nearly an hour. "A very long time to adjust lights," Poirot murmured. "And the scepter, was it ever removed from the case during this adjustment?" "No," she answered quickly, though her gaze drifted as if searching her memory. "At least, not to my knowledge." Poirot thanked her with a courteous nod, then drifted away before her rising panic could tangle the line of inquiry further. Hastings caught up. "So Radcliffe is the main suspect?" Poirot gave a small, amused shake of his head. "Non, you leap, mon ami, and in an investigation, the man who leaps first, he lands last. We are merely gathering the threads." The next thread approached in the form of Miss Eliza Trent, notebook already in hand, eyes bright with the thrill of scandal. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her tone half respectful, half hungry. "If you are assisting in this matter, I would like a statement for tomorrow's edition." Poirot smiled politely. "Mademoiselle, to give a statement before even one clue is examined. This would be most disorderly, and I do not encourage disorder." She flushed slightly, then narrowed her gaze. "I suppose the museum will want this hushed up, but the public has a right to know. A theft like this during a sealed event. Well, it suggests the thief is among us, doesn't it?" Hastings almost answered, but Poirot placed a light hand on his arm, silencing him. "And what do you think, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked, watching her with keen interest. "Does your instinct tell you something more?" She hesitated, though not from fear, rather from calculation. "Only that some very influential people here have very much to lose. A priceless scepter vanishing under such scrutiny. Someone planned this. Someone confident." "You sound almost admiring," Hastings muttered. She gave a thin smile. "I admire a story, Captain Hastings, not the criminal." Poirot thanked her as well, though Hastings noticed he watched her retreating form with a thoughtful intensity. The guards had finished sealing the final exit when Lord Radcliffe, red-faced and breathing heavily, demanded to be heard. "This is an outrage. I will not be treated like a common criminal." He thrust a finger toward the nearest guard. "I have funded half the exhibitions in this establishment. I will not stand here while imbecilic procedures—" Poirot stepped into his line of fire. "Pardon, milord, but you must understand, no one is being accused. We seek only the truth." Radcliffe drew a sharp breath, then visibly reined himself in. "The truth, yes. The truth is that someone in this room plotted to embarrass me, perhaps sabotage the exhibition entirely. Do you realize the importance of tonight? Representatives from 3 foreign museums were present. The ramifications—" "Your concern is noted," Poirot said gently. "But I must ask, during your early inspection today, were you ever alone with the scepter?" Radcliffe stiffened, and for a heartbeat his expression faltered. Yes, briefly. The curator stepped out to speak with one of her staff. But you hardly think that being alone with an object that later vanishes is significant?" Poirot asked, without accusation but with unmistakable precision. Radcliffe bristled. "You are twisting my words. If you had any sense, you'd be questioning the staff, not me." Poirot's smile remained perfectly mild. "I intend to question everyone, milord. Rest assured." Radcliffe stormed off, muttering under his breath. Hastings exhaled. "Well, if he isn't guilty, he certainly behaves like someone who has something to hide." Poirot looked after Radcliffe. "Many people hide things, Hastings. But not all hid things are criminal. Some are merely inconvenient." Before Hastings could form a reply, a young man approached nervously, a museum aide scarcely out of university, judging by his uncertain expression. "Sir, Monsieur Poirot, the security chief requests your presence in the vault corridor. He says you must see something." Poirot nodded and followed without delay. Hastings hurried after them as they were led beyond the velvet rope, past the murmuring crowd, and into the dimly lit hallway that connected the exhibition space to the administrative wing. The security chief, a broad-shouldered man with a clipped mustache, gestured toward the floor. "There, sir, we found it just now." Hastings followed his gaze and blinked. A single piece of amber lay upon the polished tiles, no larger than a fingernail, glowing faintly like a drop of frozen sunlight. Poirot crouched swiftly, studying it without touching. His face shifted, only slightly, but Hastings knew those minute expressions well. "This," Poirot murmured, "should not be here." "Do you think it fell from the scepter?" Hastings asked. Poirot straightened, eyes narrowing. "No, Hastings. I think someone wished us to believe it did." The tension in the hallway thickened. The security chief shifted uneasily. Poirot lifted a gloved hand to silence any further speculation. "We return now to the guests. Our thief is confident, but confidence, when misplaced, can be most revealing." And with that, Hercule Poirot turned back toward the murmuring hall, the smallest spark of triumph in his eye. Poirot and Hastings re-entered the exhibition hall with the quiet urgency of men returning to a stage where every actor had frozen mid-performance. The guests, still trapped behind sealed doors, watched with thin anxiety. Some attempted composure, others failed. All sensed a shift, though none understood it. The small piece of amber lay hidden in Poirot's pocket, wrapped carefully, its meaning as yet unknown. Hastings stayed close, observing Poirot's gaze sweep the room, pausing on each suspect. Lord Radcliffe stood stiffly near the refreshments, scowling at a glass of untouched wine. Miss Trent scribbled with renewed determination, though her trembling hand betrayed tension. Dr. Ainsworth, pale but resolute, whispered instructions to staff who looked barely composed. Poirot paused near a cluster of guests by the empty display. One, a man with a monocle and clear impatience, addressed him, "Monsieur Poirot, is progress being made? My wife and I had plans." Poirot inclined his head. Progress does not hurry, monsieur. It reveals itself when allowed. The man muttered and turned away. Poirot moved on, stopping at the display case to study the pedestal where the scepter had rested. He noted the faint pressure marks on the velvet. No force, he murmured. No disturbance. Yet the scepter is gone. Hastings frowned. Could someone have used a key? Perhaps. But thefts of this kind rely on timing and misdirection more than tools. He rose and approached the conservation specialists. The eldest, a woman with silver-streaked hair, stepped forward. "The scepter was last handled this morning?" Poirot asked. "Yes, it was secure." "Anything unusual?" She hesitated. The head of security insisted on an extra systems check. He mentioned a minor glitch. Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Resolved?" "We were told yes." Poirot thanked her and walked on. Hastings followed. "So the system may have been altered." "We must consider it," Poirot replied. Before more could be said, a guard hurried to Dr. Ainsworth, holding a small object. Poirot and Hastings approached. "We found this near the service corridor," the guard said. It was a glove. Black, elegant, expensive. Miss Trent stepped forward. "That belongs to Lord Radcliffe. I saw him wearing those when he arrived." Heads turned to Radcliffe, whose expression wavered. Poirot raised a hand. "Let us not leap. A glove proves nothing." Radcliffe snapped. "I told you. I had nothing to do with this." Poirot regarded him calmly. "Then you will not object to telling us where you were before the unveiling?" Radcliffe hesitated. "I was speaking with Miss Trent." Miss Trent's brows rose. "No. I was near the entrance." "You were not." A ripple of murmurs spread. Poirot watched Radcliffe. "Again, my lord?" Radcliffe stiffened. "I stepped to the washroom, briefly." "Not suspicious," Poirot said mildly, "but of interest." Hastings felt tension rise. Poirot allowed a moment of silence before turning away. His focus settled on the young museum aide who had summoned them earlier. The aide stood alone, shoulders tight. Poirot approached. "You, monsieur, you have been quiet. Quiet men often see what louder ones miss. Tell me, what did you witness that you have not shared?" The aide paled. I don't know what you mean." "You were nervous earlier," Poirot said gently. "Not only from alarm, you had already seen something." The aide swallowed. "I saw someone near the vault corridor before the lights dimmed. I didn't see their face. They moved quickly, as if avoiding notice. I assumed they were staff." "And the direction they came from?" Poirot asked. "From the service wing." Ainsworth gasped. "Only staff may enter." "Not entirely," Poirot murmured. "Some guests wander." Radcliffe bristled. "This is absurd." Poirot ignored him. "Their clothing?" "Dark coat. Gloves. Something shiny on the wrist. A watch, maybe." Miss Trent spoke quickly. "Radcliffe wears a gold watch." "So do others," Radcliffe barked. Poirot raised his hand. "We will not accuse yet." He turned back to the aide. "Anything else?" The aide hesitated. "After the scepter vanished, I checked the corridor. The door to the old archive room was slightly open." "Unusual?" "Yes, it is always locked." Poirot's eyes brightened. "Merci, monsieur. This is helpful." Hastings leaned closer. "Do you think the scepter is hidden there?" Poirot smiled faintly. "I think the thief may trust a simple hiding place." He motioned toward the corridor, every guest watching as he stepped into the dim passage, the truth drawing nearer with each quiet step. Poirot advanced with steady steps, his gaze fixed ahead, yet Hastings noticed the slight tilt of his head that meant he was listening to every breath behind them. The corridor was narrow, lined with framed sketches of artifacts, each illuminated by a dim overhead lamp. Hastings felt a faint chill, though he could not say whether it came from the corridor or from the tension coiling around the investigation. Halfway down, Poirot paused. "You hear it, Hastings?" Hastings strained his ears. "I'm not sure. Perhaps a movement." "Not movement," Poirot said softly. "The absence of movement. When a space should hold stillness and does not, that is when one must pay attention." They reached the archive door. It remained slightly ajar, just as the aide had described. Poirot studied the narrow gap, then placed 2 fingers upon the wood. He did not push it open yet. Instead, he leaned closer, listening. Hastings held his breath, unsure why. Poirot straightened. "Someone has been here recently, and perhaps," he added, "someone may still be within." Indeed. Poirot did not push the door open at once. He let the quiet settle, as though the faintest tremor of air might confide a secret. Hastings waited tensely, aware that even his own breathing sounded intrusive. Poirot then applied just enough pressure for the door to drift inward, revealing a room steeped in dust and dim lamplight. The archive smelled of old parchment and metal, a scent that suggested nothing had been disturbed for years, yet Hastings sensed instantly that something had been. Poirot stepped inside with careful precision, his polished shoes making no more sound than a sigh. The archive was small, lined with cabinets that rose to the ceiling. A single table stood in the center, stacked with cataloging papers. Everything appeared untouched, but Poirot's eyes narrowed at once. He drifted toward the far-right cabinet, pausing before a drawer that sat half a centimeter askew. To Hastings it seemed insignificant, but Poirot tilted his head in that acute way that signaled his mind had already begun rearranging pieces. "You see, Hastings," he murmured, "a disruption in a room of order speaks loudly." Hastings attempted to open the drawer, but Poirot halted him with a gentle gesture. "No, mon ami. Allow the room to speak before we impose ourselves." Poirot leaned closer to the handle, noticing a faint smear, almost invisible unless one searched. He touched it with a gloved fingertip. "Oil, fresh, someone with haste and perhaps nerves." Hastings felt the prickle of anticipation. "Do you think they hid the scepter here?" Poirot shook his head. "No. A thief does not hide treasure in a drawer so easily discovered, but they may have sought something, perhaps a tool, or perhaps a distraction." He opened the drawer with a careful pull. Inside lay nothing more dramatic than folders, numbered tags, and a coil of cotton gloves. Yet one glove was missing from the set. "Interesting," Poirot murmured. "Someone replaced a glove with a glove." Hastings frowned. "I beg your pardon." Poirot held up the set. "This pair contains only one glove. The missing partner is not here. And the glove found earlier, that one was not the twin. A subtle confusion, yes? But confusion rarely benefits the innocent." Before Hastings could respond, a faint metallic clatter sounded from behind a tall column of cabinets. Poirot froze, eyes sharpening. Hastings instinctively stepped forward, but Poirot raised a hand again. "Remain still. The intruder reveals themselves by movement. We reveal ourselves by thought." A shadow shifted behind the far cabinet. Poirot approached not with aggression, but with the deceptive gentleness of one coaxing a frightened bird. "Come, my friend. You accomplish nothing by hiding. The doors are sealed. No escape is possible save through honesty." For a moment, silence held. Then a figure stepped out, young, nervous, and trembling. Hastings recognized him. One of the conservation assistants, a slight man with spectacles and an expression that now bordered on panic. His name, Hastings recalled, was Edward Lyle. Poirot regarded him with calm interest. "Monsieur Lyle, you have chosen a curious moment for solitude." The assistant swallowed hard. I wasn't hiding. I came to make sure nothing here had been disturbed." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Très curieux, because something has been disturbed, and your presence coincides most closely with the disturbance." Lyle wrung his hands. "I swear I didn't take the scepter. I would never. Dr. Ainsworth trusts me." You only what? Poirot asked softly. Lyle avoided his gaze. I heard someone in this corridor earlier. Footsteps, quick ones. I followed at a distance, but by the time I reached the archive door, whoever it was had gone. The door was ajar. I panicked. Why panic? Poirot asked. Because, Lyle whispered, I'm already under suspicion at the museum. This caused Hastings to blink. Suspicion, whatever for? Lyle looked utterly defeated. Last month, a small artifact went missing, a Roman coin. It was found later in a storage crate, misfiled. But some staff blamed me. They said I was careless, or worse. Poirot studied him carefully. And were you careless? Lyle shook his head vehemently. I had nothing to do with it, but I know how people look at me now. And when I saw the archive door open tonight, I thought if someone accused me of being here, well, no one would believe otherwise. Poirot regarded him for a long moment, then nodded. Fear makes the innocent behave in ways that mimic guilt. This is true, but it does not make them thieves. Lyle looked ready to collapse with relief. However, Poirot continued, your story provides something valuable. You say you followed someone. Did you see anything else? Clothing? Movement? Lyle hesitated. Only a shape, and I think they carried something small in their hand. A tool, maybe. Something metallic. A tool? Poirot repeated with interest. For opening a sealed case, perhaps? Lyle looked uncertain. I couldn't tell. Poirot thanked him and gently dismissed him. When the assistant had gone, Hastings leaned closer. Do you believe him? Poirot's mustaches twitched thoughtfully. I believe he fears being misunderstood, and such fear does not inspire a man to steal a priceless scepter. Hastings exhaled. Then the real thief is still ahead of us. Oui, Poirot said quietly, and they grow bolder by the minute. He turned back to the archive door, closing it with careful deliberation. This room holds no treasure, but it holds a truth. The thief moves freely and without panic. They know the museum far better than they pretend. As they stepped back into the corridor, Hastings glanced over his shoulder. So what now? Poirot straightened his cuffs with impeccable calm. Now, mon ami, we return to the suspects. Someone's story no longer aligns with time, place, or human nature, and when a story breaks, he tapped his temple. The little grey cells, repair it. Poirot and Hastings emerged from the dimness of the archive corridor and stepped once more into the bright tension of the exhibition hall. The guests had clustered into uneasy pockets of conversation, each group glancing up as the detective reappeared, as though hoping he might already carry the solution in his breast pocket. Yet Poirot's face revealed nothing. If anything, the faint lift of his brows suggested that some new thread had presented itself, though not yet in a form fit for display. Dr. Ainsworth hurried toward them at once. Monsieur Poirot, did you discover anything? The guards said you found someone in the archive room. A young man, yes, Poirot replied, smoothing a sleeve, but not the one we seek. Fear, not guilt, drove him there. He studied her face carefully. Tell me, mademoiselle, who besides your conservation team would have reason to enter the archive? Who holds keys? Ainsworth hesitated. Myself, of course, the head of security. And Lord Radcliffe insisted on a set for his private inspection privileges, though I objected. Poirot nodded slowly. And the keys? Are they kept under lock? Yes. A central cabinet. Only registered staff may sign them out. Then someone has been creative, Poirot murmured. Or someone with access has been less than vigilant. A faint flush touched Ainsworth's cheeks. If you're implying... I imply nothing, mademoiselle, Poirot said gently. I ask only what must be asked. Before she could answer, Miss Trent approached, notebook in hand, eyes sharp with speculation. You went to the service wing, she said. Did you find the scepter? or evidence pointing to the obvious suspect. Poirot regarded her calmly. And for you, mademoiselle, who is the obvious suspect? She gestured subtly toward Lord Radcliffe, who stood rigidly by a marble column, glaring at anyone who ventured too close. He had access. He behaved erratically. He has a great deal to lose if the exhibition were to fail. Seems rather clear. Ah, Poirot said mildly. The danger of what seems. Appearances may seduce the mind into false clarity. Miss Trent's jaw tightened. Then perhaps you prefer another suspect. Prefer? Poirot lifted a delicate brow. I prefer only truth, mademoiselle, and truth rarely arrives dressed in what seems convenient. Before the conversation could continue, a sudden chime echoed through the hall, one of the security panels flashing amber. A guard hurried to examine it, speaking briefly into his radio. Poirot's attention sharpened instantly. What is that? He asked. The guard straightened. A triggered sensor, sir. Near the upper gallery stairwell. It shouldn't be active. No one is supposed to be up there. Poirot exchanged a loaded glance with Hastings. Without waiting for permission, he strode toward the stairwell, the crowd parting before him like water disturbed by a quiet but irresistible current. Hastings followed close, his pulse quickening. The stairwell led upward into partial darkness, lit only by scattered sconces. Poirot climbed with measured steps, pausing at the landing as he observed faint scuff marks across the first few risers. Hastings, he whispered. You see the dust disturbed? Someone came this way in haste. They reached the upper gallery, a long balcony overlooking the main exhibition hall. It was empty, or appeared so. Poirot approached the railing. Below, the guests looked small and helpless. Their anxious faces turned upward at the slightest sound. What would a thief seek up here? Hastings murmured. Not escape, Poirot said. The exits are sealed, but perhaps solitude, or perhaps... His voice trailed off, replaced by sudden, focused stillness. He stepped toward a pedestal that held a series of informational pamphlets. One pamphlet was torn at the edge, the fibers stretched as if gripped roughly. Poirot lifted it carefully. Someone waited here, someone concealed themselves, and someone watched. Watched what? Hastings asked. Watched the reaction below. Poirot said softly. Our thief is one who enjoys understanding the unfolding drama. A thief who considers themselves clever. This is the sign of an ego that wishes to admire its work. Before Hastings could respond, a faint metallic click sounded from behind a large display board. Poirot turned sharply. Come out, he said, voice firm but not harsh. You gain nothing by listening from the shadows. A figure stepped into view, not Radcliffe, nor Ainsworth, nor Trent. It was the head of security, Chief Weathers, his expression defensive. I wasn't hiding, he said at once. I came up because the sensor tripped. It's my responsibility. Poirot regarded him with unsettling calm. Indeed. And yet you are perspiring, monsieur, more than a man performing only his duty. Weathers stiffened. It's been a long night. Of course. Poirot stepped closer. Tell me, Chief, this minor glitch earlier in the week, when exactly did it occur? Weathers looked irritated. 3 days ago, a sensor malfunction. It's common in older systems. And you repaired it? With my team, yes. Poirot nodded slowly. You're a man of systems. You understand them intimately. You know their weaknesses, their capacities, their blind spots. Weathers frowned. If you're implying I tampered with anything, I imply nothing. I simply observe. You had both time and knowledge, and you were among the small group inspecting the case earlier. That's procedure, Weathers snapped. Any accusation otherwise is absurd. Poirot tilted his head. Accusation? You mistake my intent. I merely gather what is necessary. Weathers gritted his teeth. If you want cooperation, don't treat me like a suspect. All are suspects until the truth excuses them, Poirot replied mildly. But some show their nerves more readily than others. Weathers turned abruptly and descended the stairs, shoulders stiff. Hastings watched him go. Do you think he's involved? Poirot's eyes lingered on the stairwell. He's a man who guards secrets, but whether they are his own or another's. That is what we must discover. He looked back over the balcony at the anxious assembly below. Our thief grows restless, Hastings. The trap tightens. And soon, very soon, someone will make a mistake. The faintest smile touched his lips. Calm, certain, inevitable. For the little grey cells, Poirot murmured. The picture becomes clearer. Poirot lingered a moment longer on the upper gallery, gazing down at the crowd as though each face formed a tile in some intricate mosaic only he could decipher. Hastings waited beside him, noting the slight tightening at the corners of Poirot's eyes, a sign, he knew, that the detective's thoughts had begun to align into something resembling structure. But Poirot did not yet speak. Instead, he let the silence settle like dust before turning away from the railing and making his way back toward the stairs. As they descended, Hastings murmured, "That business with Chief Weathers, he certainly seemed unsettled." "Oui," Poirot replied softly. "Unsettled men do not always mean guilty men, but they often mean men who fear the exposure of truths less comfortable than crime." Hastings frowned. "What sort of truths?" Poirot adjusted his tie. "We shall discover it, mon ami, but not by placing our expectations ahead of our observations." They stepped back into the exhibition hall, where the murmurs swelled once more at their return. Lord Radcliffe stood rigidly from afar, arms crossed, as though preparing for another perceived insult. Miss Trent sharpened her stance, her pen poised like a dagger over her notebook. Dr. Ainsworth, however, approached them immediately, her expression stretched thin. "Please tell me," she whispered, "that some progress has been made. The Board of Trustees is already on edge. If the scepter is not recovered soon—" Poirot lifted a calming hand. "Mademoiselle, the truth moves steadily, but it moves. That is enough for now. But we cannot stay much longer without answers. The guests are growing impatient." Poirot studied her carefully. "Impatience is the refuge of those who do not wish to examine themselves. We must allow it, but not be guided by it." Radcliffe chose that moment to stride forward. His temper clearly wound to its uppermost limit. "Monsieur Poirot," he snapped, "I demand transparency. You have questioned me, humiliated me, and now I hear whispers you found evidence upstairs. If there is something against me, say it plainly." Poirot turned to him with polite composure. "Milord, if you desire clarity, I shall give it. I have found evidence of misdirection, and misdirection is the friend of theatrical thieves." Radcliffe bristled. "What's that supposed to mean? That someone wishes us to look where they point, not where they act?" Radcliffe opened his mouth to argue, but Poirot stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly. "Milord, you are a man accustomed to control, and control, when threatened, becomes frustration, but frustration does not make a thief." "Tonight you have shown much frustration." Radcliffe blinked. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying," Poirot continued, "that your anger has been most helpful, for anger reveals more than silence." Miss Trent swept forward, seizing upon the tension. "If not Lord Radcliffe, then who? You question Chief Weathers. Is he the culprit?" Poirot regarded her like a specimen under examination. "Mademoiselle Trent, you write for the truth, yet you ask only for drama. Why is that?" She flushed. "The public deserves answers." "And what do you deserve?" Poirot asked gently. "Fame? Recognition? Or perhaps the satisfaction of shaping the story rather than reporting it?" Miss Trent glared. "You're implying I'm influencing the investigation." "Non. I imply only that you are invested in its conclusion. Deeply so." She hesitated, then retreated a step, not defeated, but startled. Before Hastings could reflect on this exchange, one of the guards approached at a brisk pace. "Monsieur Poirot," he said quietly, "we've completed a sweep of the upper gallery, found nothing but—" He glanced over his shoulder, then leaned in. Someone tried to force access to the control room. Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Ah, now that is an act of desperation." Ainsworth paled. "The control room? But that handles every lock, light, and alarm in the building." "Just so," Poirot murmured. "Which means our thief feared we were drawing too close." Radcliffe stepped forward again. "Then the scepter must still be inside the building." Poirot nodded. "It cannot leave without detection. And so we return to the beginning. Where could a thief hide an object of such size and weight when all doors were sealed?" Hastings glanced around the hall. "There are dozens of displays. Perhaps one of them—" Poirot shook his head. No thief would hide something in plain sight unless the sight itself was obscured. "What do you mean?" Hastings asked. Poirot looked around at the guests. "Many eyes, Hastings, and yet very few truly look. People see what they expect, what they wish, or what they fear. The guilty rely on this." Miss Trent, still hovering near enough to hear, interjected, "Then who here is seeing what they wish us to see?" Poirot smiled faintly. "That, mademoiselle, is the question." He turned unexpectedly toward Ainsworth. "Mademoiselle, earlier you told me the scepter was never removed from the case during adjustments, yet the lighting took nearly an hour to change. Why?" Ainsworth blinked. "The lighting team struggled with the angles. The scepter's amber tip refracts oddly." "And during this hour," Poirot asked, "was the case open at any point?" She hesitated. "Just briefly. Lord Radcliffe insisted on verifying the condition of the scepter under a different angle." A murmur rippled across the hall. Radcliffe sputtered. "That was routine." Poirot nodded. "Routine, yes, but invaluable knowledge for a thief." Ainsworth's eyes widened. "You think the thief watched that inspection?" Poirot tilted his head. "Not only watched, learned, timing, procedure, distraction. It was all demonstrated." Hastings felt a shiver. "So the thief rehearsed the crime without us knowing?" Poirot smiled gently. "Très bien, Hastings." Before any further response could be made, another guard hurried over. Breathless, "Monsieur Poirot, we've found something, near the emergency stairwell." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Something?" "A cloth, and—" he swallowed. "A faint trace of gold dust." Ainsworth gasped. "Gold dust from the scepter's inlay." Poirot straightened with quiet triumph. "At last, the thief begins to leave a trail." He motioned to Hastings. "Come, mon ami, the next step reveals itself." And with that, Poirot moved toward the stairwell, the tension in the hall tightening like a string drawn toward its breaking point. Poirot walked toward the emergency stairwell with a stride that was calm, yet unmistakably purposeful, as though each footstep carried him closer to a truth only he could sense forming. Hastings followed at his side, noting how the detective's posture had changed, straighter, more alert, the slight forward tilt of a man who felt the pattern beginning to reveal its design. The guard who had brought the news waited anxiously by the stairwell door, clutching a sealed evidence pouch. "Show me," Poirot said softly. The guard opened the pouch with careful hands. Inside lay a square of dark cloth, its fibers faintly dusted with shimmering gold. Poirot lifted it delicately between two fingers, holding it under the nearest light. The dust sparkled like grains of captured sunlight. "The gold," Hastings murmured. "It must be from the scepter." "Oui," Poirot said. "But note, Hastings, the dust is light, as though brushed away, not scraped. Our thief handled the scepter, but carefully." The guard stepped forward. "We found the cloth caught on the stairwell railing, almost like it tore loose as someone hurried past." Poirot murmured, studying the edges. "But see, it is not torn. It is folded. Someone wished it to appear dropped in haste. Yet it is placed gently, even artfully, a contradiction that speaks loudly. Hastings frowned. So the thief wants us to believe they rushed. Why? Poirot smiled faintly. Because they did not rush at all. The stairwell itself was narrow and stark, lit by harsh fluorescent strips. Poirot walked down 3 steps, paused, then crouched to inspect the railing. Hastings saw nothing but metal, dust, and shadows, yet Poirot leaned closer, his moustaches twitching slightly in concentration. "You observe," Poirot said quietly, "that the railing dust is disturbed only here, not below or above. The perpetrator touched just enough of the railing to create the illusion of descent, but no further." "So they didn't go down at all," Hastings breathed. Poirot straightened. "Exactement. They wished us to chase a phantom trail, but the truth, it remains where it always is. In the human mind, not in the shadows of stairwells." They returned to the hall, where tension had thickened into something brittle. Miss Trent hovered near the barrier rope, restless, watching everyone with the keen alertness of a hawk. Radcliffe paced with barely constrained irritation, pausing occasionally to glare at anyone who met his eye. Dr. Ainsworth stood rigid near the display case, her hands clasped tight enough to whiten the knuckles. Poirot approached her first. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "tell me, who among your staff knows the emergency stairwell triggers do not activate unless the door is fully opened?" Ainsworth blinked. "Only senior staff. Myself, the department heads, and Chief Weathers." "Not the junior assistants?" "No, they are not trained on those systems." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "So the thief counted on the alarm being triggered if the door opened. They wanted us to believe they passed through it when in fact they merely brushed the sensor." Hastings felt a sudden shift in his understanding. "You mean they knew exactly how much the door needed to move? Someone who understands the building's systems?" Ainsworth paled slightly. "Are you implying Chief Weathers?" Poirot lifted a hand. "I imply nothing. I examine possibilities. But I am increasingly certain the thief holds intimate knowledge of the museum." Before they could continue, Lord Radcliffe approached, shoulders stiff, voice taut with impatience. "Poirot, this has gone on long enough. If the scepter is still inside the building, then search every room. Why waste time with theories?" Poirot regarded him with serene patience. "Because a theory, my lord, can save us many hours of fruitless searching. The thief is not hiding the scepter in a broom cupboard. They have chosen a place that fits their psychology." Radcliffe scoffed. "Psychology? Objects are hidden, not psychoanalyzed." Poirot's eyes twinkled. But thieves are psychoanalyzed, and it is thieves who choose the hiding place." Miss Trent stepped forward abruptly. "Then tell us, Monsieur Poirot, what sort of psychology hides a priceless scepter in this fashion?" Poirot looked at her a long moment, as though searching beneath her poised exterior. "One who wishes to mislead rather than conceal. One who watches reactions. One who enjoys being close to the chaos they create." Her lips tightened. "You're suggesting the thief is here among us, observing." Poirot inclined his head. "Very closely." A stir moved through the guests. People instinctively shifted, suddenly aware of every glance, every movement. Hastings noticed something, small but unmistakable. Edward Lyle, the nervous conservation assistant, stood near the far wall, hands shoved in his pockets, avoiding eye contact. But unlike before, he was not trembling. He appeared calmer. Too calm, Hastings thought, for someone previously terrified of suspicion. Poirot noticed as well. His gaze drifted toward Lyle without turning his head, a subtle shift only Hastings could interpret. Poirot then addressed the room at large. "Mesdames et messieurs, the thief has left us many clues. Clues of misdirection, haste, cables, gloves, dust. But these clues tell us not what happened, but what somebody wished us to believe." Radcliffe bristled. And what do you believe?" Poirot folded his hands neatly. "I believe the thief handled the scepter lightly, left gold dust intentionally, placed a cloth with care, manipulated sensor triggers, and guided our attention toward stairwells and corridors." Miss Trent spoke sharply. "So the thief wanted to appear bold?" "No," Poirot corrected softly. "They wanted to appear careless." A hush fell. Even Radcliffe seemed momentarily struck silent. Poirot continued walking slowly through the hall. A careless thief attracts swift suspicion, but a careful thief who makes themselves appear careless. That thief is dangerous. He paused near the velvet rope, turning slightly toward Hastings. "Because that thief counts on one thing, that we focus on the wrong emotion." Hastings frowned. "What emotion?" Poirot answered without hesitation. "Pity." A ripple of shock passed through the room. Miss Trent stepped forward, voice barely audible. "Monsieur Poirot, who here inspires pity?" Poirot's eyes rested on a single person, but he did not speak the name. "Not yet." Instead, he said quietly, "The next clue will reveal them, and I believe it is waiting for us, even now, if we know where to look." He turned toward the dim service corridor. "Come, Hastings. The truth beckons." Poirot moved toward the service corridor with the same composed purpose he had shown all evening, yet Hastings sensed a new sharpness in his stride, as though the detective were no longer searching aimlessly, but following the faint but certain pull of an answer forming just beyond the visible. The guests watched him slip into the dim passageway, their murmurs fading behind the closing door. The corridor felt narrower now, more intimate, lined with the same framed sketches and dim lamps as before, though the air carried a different weight. Poirot paused only briefly, allowing the silence to settle before continuing deeper. Hastings kept close, feeling each step heighten the tension in his chest. "What are we looking for exactly?" Hastings whispered. "For something small, mon ami," Poirot replied softly. "Something a thief would drop only when they wish to appear clumsy, but not so clumsy as to lose control?" Hastings frowned. "And pity, Poirot. You spoke of someone who seeks pity." Poirot nodded. "A thief who hides beneath fragility sometimes escapes suspicion entirely. But when that fragility becomes too convenient, too well-timed, then we must look more closely." As they passed the archive room again, Poirot knelt to inspect the floor just inside the threshold. Hastings saw nothing but dust and the faint outline of old footprints. But Poirot's sharp eyes caught a glimmer, thin, nearly invisible. He plucked it gently from the floor. It was a single thread, no longer than a fingernail, pale gray and fine as silk. "A thread?" Hastings whispered. Poirot examined it, eyes narrowing. From a glove, perhaps. Not from Lord Radcliffe's pair. They were black, and not from the conservation gloves. They are cotton. He looked up, but from a pair such as a nervous young man might wear if he wished to appear careful. Hastings inhaled sharply. "Lyle?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Patience. One thread does not weave a tapestry." They continued down the corridor, approaching a small alcove where carts, tools, and crates were stored before display installations. A faint light flickered from within, barely visible, as though someone had tampered with the utility lamp above. Poirot stepped inside. The alcove had been disturbed. A crate stood half open, packing straw spilling from its side. Another lay tipped slightly, as though moved recently. Poirot circled slowly, his eyes absorbing every detail. He stopped beside the tipped crate and brushed his gloved fingers along the rim. "Fresh dust," he murmured. "Not from age, but from movement." Hastings crouched beside him. "Do you think the scepter was here?" Poirot shook his head. "No, but perhaps something related to it." He reached inside the crate carefully. Hastings waited. Breath caught, and then Poirot withdrew something small and metallic, a brass tag. the kind used for cataloguing artifacts before they are assigned to permanent displays. The number engraved on it read A17B. Hastings squinted. "Do you recognize that?" Poirot nodded slowly. A17B is the temporary intake code for the scepter, before it was installed for the exhibition. "So this crate held the scepter before today?" Hastings asked. "Only briefly," Poirot said. "But the presence of this tag, that is interesting. Someone retrieved it. Someone placed it here. A person who wished to imply the scepter had been moved improperly." Hastings frowned. "But why?" Poirot turned the tag over. "To implicate staff, or to create the appearance of internal mishandling, or perhaps—" his expression changed subtly. "To suggest their own innocence by drowning themselves among harmless objects." Hastings stiffened. "You're certain it's Lyle now?" Poirot merely pocketed the tag. "I'm certain of nothing yet. But consider, a man who feels accused preemptively seeks shelter behind his own vulnerability." Before Hastings could respond, a soft sound drifted from deeper in the alcove, a faint metallic click, then another, as though something delicate brushed against the floor. Poirot lifted a hand, freezing them both. The sound came again, near the shelving racks. Hastings whispered, "Someone's there." Poirot nodded once. He stepped forward with silent precision, navigating between crates until he reached the narrow space behind the shelving. There, half hidden in shadow, lay a small object on the floor. Poirot stooped to retrieve it. It was a broken clasp. Not from jewelry, not from a bag, but from a glove. A grey glove. Precisely the shade that the thread matched. Poirot closed his fingers around it, his expression unreadable. Hastings exhaled slowly. This must be enough to confront him. Poirot's voice was calm. "Evidence of clumsiness so abundant is rarely genuine, Hastings. The true thief is careful. But one pretending to be fragile, they scatter crumbs." "Then it's a trap," Hastings breathed. "Not for us," Poirot replied. "For sympathy." They left the alcove, stepping back into the main corridor. As they reached the archway leading to the hall, Poirot paused. He listened. Voices carried through, the guests stirring restlessly, Miss Trent arguing with Radcliffe, Chief Weathers attempting to impose order. The tension had grown sharper, like a bowstring pulled too tight. Someone was close to unraveling. Poirot whispered, "The thief grows impatient. Their false facade begins to strain." They entered the hall again, and immediately Hastings saw the shift. Edward Lyle stood near the center now, not shrinking against a wall, but speaking in a hushed, urgent tone to Miss Trent. His movements were sharper, his eyes flicking anxiously toward the stairwell Poirot had explored earlier. Miss Trent appeared conflicted, her brows drawn in suspicion. Poirot walked toward them with quiet certainty. Lyle turned the moment he sensed their approach. His face blanched. "Monsieur Poirot? Did you find anything?" he asked, voice thin. Poirot looked at him gently. "Oh yes, monsieur. Several things." Lyle swallowed. "And? Do they point to the thief?" Poirot tilted his head. "They point, yes. The question is, who wished them to?" The young man froze. Poirot stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Hastings and Lyle could hear. "When a man wishes to avoid blame, he acts small. When he wishes to be overlooked, he trembles. But when he trembles too consistently, even in moments where true fear would demand stillness, then I begin to wonder." Lyle's breath hitched. Poirot continued, "Tell me, monsieur, why do you scatter clues of frailty behind you?" Lyle shook his head. I don't know what you mean." But Poirot's voice grew softer still, almost kind. "It is time to stop hiding behind pity. The truth waits for no one." And the room seemed to hold its breath as Lyle took one step back, Then another, his mask beginning to crack under Poirot's unerring gaze. Lyle stepped back as though Poirot's words had struck him physically, his eyes darting from face to face as if searching for someone, anyone, who might shield him. But no rescue came. The other guests watched with a mixture of curiosity and dread, each instinctively sensing that something critical was taking shape. Miss Trent pulled her notebook closer to her chest, her expression sharpening. Hastings felt the hush ripple through the hall like a chill draft. Poirot, however, did not advance on Lyle with accusation. Instead, he maintained the same gentle composure, his voice soft enough to calm and precise enough to corner. "Monsieur Lyle," he said, "it is not guilt I see upon your face. It is fear. Fear of something larger than yourself." Lyle shook his head quickly, backing into a small display pedestal. "I'm not afraid. I just don't understand what you want from me." Poirot regarded him kindly. "Then allow me to ask a simple question. Why did you tell us only part of what you saw near the vault corridor? You said you glimpsed a figure but offered nothing else. Yet you saw more, did you not?" Lyle's throat bobbed. I didn't know if it mattered." "It mattered very much," Poirot said softly. "Enough that you hid it." Miss Trent leaned toward Lyle, her voice sharp despite herself. "What else did you see?" Lyle swallowed. "Just a flash of something. Metal. I thought it was a tool. I didn't want to accuse anyone." "A thoughtful sentiment," Poirot said, "and yet you planted evidence that suggested tampering. The archive thread, the glove clasp, too conveniently dropped." Hastings added gently, "You wanted us to suspect someone else." Lyle's eyes glimmered with rising desperation. No, it wasn't like that." Poirot stepped closer, speaking in a soothing tone that made the young man freeze. "You wished to divert suspicion from yourself, yes, but not because you are the thief. Because you believed that if you were questioned, the thief would turn on you, someone you feared intensely." Gasps fluttered from the crowd like startled birds. Poirot continued, "You scattered the false clues not to incriminate someone, but to confuse us, to make us chase shadows so that the real culprit would not see you trembling." Lyle looked as though he might collapse. "Please," he whispered, "I didn't want trouble with anyone. I just wanted to keep my job." Poirot nodded slowly. "Then you will help us now. You will tell me whom you fear." Lyle closed his eyes, shoulders shaking. Hastings felt an ache of sympathy in his chest. The young man looked impossibly small beneath the weight of expectation. But before he could speak, a voice cut through the air, controlled, measured, but trembling with the effort to sound firm. "That is enough." Chief Weathers stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. His normally composed demeanor was strained. There was a tautness in his jaw that suggested he had fought internally before voicing the interruption. The guards glanced nervously at him, unsure whether to stand at attention or melt into the background. Poirot turned toward him, his brows rising ever so slightly. "Monsieur Weathers, you object?" Weathers drew in a breath. "This questioning is bordering on harassment. The boy has clearly done nothing wrong, and I won't let him be bullied into saying something he'll regret." Poirot's expression remained serene. "Ah, you defend him with vigor." Lyle's eyes widened, as though he hadn't expected that defense from the very man he feared. Poirot stepped aside just enough so that Weathers had room to approach the trembling assistant. "You protect him," Poirot murmured, "because you believe him weak." Weathers glared. "Because he is innocent." "Is he?" Poirot asked gently. "Or is he simply afraid of the wrong person?" A muscle twitched in Weathers's cheek. Poirot continued, voice mild but piercing. The failures in the security system, the glitch that allowed the perpetrator to avoid triggering alarms, the precise understanding of how far the stairwell door must move to alert the sensors. These are not the actions of a junior assistant. They are the actions of someone thoroughly familiar with the building's workings. The hall fell to a chilled stillness. Weathers stiffened. You're implying I stole the scepter? I imply nothing, Poirot said. I draw conclusions from behavior. When the young man faltered, you stepped in, quickly, too quickly, as though his answer might place you in danger. Weathers stepped forward, fists tightening. Is this what this has become? A witch hunt? I've given years to this museum. Yes, Poirot said softly. Years in which no one questioned your authority, your access, or your knowledge. That makes you a threat to anyone who asks too many questions. Weathers looked sharply at Lyle. You told him something, didn't you? Lyle flinched. I didn't. I swear, I didn't say anything. Poirot intervened. Monsieur Weathers, the young man said nothing. Your fear speaks for itself. Weathers' breath began to come faster. Hastings recognized the look. A man cornered not by accusation, but by the sudden recognition that someone had read him too accurately. Poirot continued walking toward him with a calm, devastating precision. You, monsieur, had the means. You supervised the case adjustments. You insisted on additional systems checks. You knew the museum's blind spots, and you knew that planting clues of the scepter's movement would confuse the investigation. But more importantly, he paused before Weathers. You needed someone weak to deflect suspicion, someone who feared you. Lyle visibly shrank. Weathers' face darkened. I have no idea what you're talking about. No? Poirot asked softly. Then answer this. Why did you enter the upper gallery before the sensor was triggered? We found no trace of the thief there, except your presence. Weathers froze. Hastings inhaled sharply. Poirot concluded, because you were watching, observing. The thief always returns to admire his handiwork. The hall erupted into murmurs. Weathers looked around wildly, like a man measuring the distance between himself and every exit. Poirot raised a hand. Do not run, monsieur. It will serve you poorly. But Weathers' breath hitched, and he reached for his side pocket. The nearest guard shouted, and in that instant, Hastings felt the room explode into movement. The moment Chief Weathers' hand darted toward his pocket, the room erupted into a chaos so sudden and sharp that Hastings felt his heart jolt as though struck. A guard lunged forward, another shouted for everyone to step back, and several guests gasped in unison, scattering like startled birds. Miss Trent nearly dropped her notebook. Radcliffe stumbled backward into a display pedestal, and Dr. Ainsworth emitted a thin cry that cut through the air. Yet in the middle of all this, Poirot stood perfectly still, his gaze icy, calculating, unshaken. Do not be foolish, monsieur, Poirot said in a voice that carried like a command. Nothing in that pocket will help you now. But Weathers' eyes, wide and burning, flicked not to Poirot, but to the nearest exit. The sealed main doors, barred and bolted. His breath came in short, ragged bursts, his hand still inside his coat but motionless now, as though even he wasn't certain whether he meant to draw something or merely grasp at what remained of control. A guard seized his arm. Sir, step away from your pocket. Weathers jerked, attempting to twist free, but two guards moved in swiftly and pinned his arms. The young assistant Lyle shrank behind a column, trembling violently, watching the scene unfold with a terror that seemed to hollow him out. Hastings stepped closer to Poirot. Good heavens, if he had pulled something. He did not, Poirot murmured, his gaze never leaving Weathers. He reached for panic, not for violence. The guards wrestled Weathers' hand free. In his grip was not a weapon, but a ring of small brass keys, trembling violently against his knuckles. Poirot nodded. As I expected. Weathers glared at him, cheeks flushed, breath unsteady. These are my keys, my responsibility. I wasn't reaching for anything except the possibility of escape, Poirot finished. But escape from what? From guilt? Or from revelation? Weathers tried to steady himself. You're twisting everything. I only meant to show my authority, my credentials. I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. Poirot approached him with slow, diamond-cut precision. Then allow me to illuminate your predicament. You're a man accustomed to control, the flow of staff, the status of alarms, the access to every restricted room. Yet tonight, every one of these strengths became a weakness. Weathers stiffened. I haven't stolen anything. No, Poirot said quietly. You have not. A ripple moved through the hall. Confusion, surprise, disbelief. Hastings blinked. What? Poirot continued, tone unwavering. You are guilty of deception, yes, of tampering with systems, of protecting someone, of misleading us, but not of theft. Weathers' face went slack with shock. Poirot turned to the room, raising his voice only slightly. Monsieur Weathers knew the identity of the thief. He feared that if suspicion fell upon the wrong person, the real culprit would be exposed, and he has been shielding that person all evening. A hush fell so deep it seemed to swallow the ticking of the nearby clock. Poirot pivoted toward Lyle. The young man froze, his face draining of all color. No, Lyle whispered. No, I didn't. I wasn't. Poirot raised a hand. I do not accuse you of stealing the scepter. I accuse you of being the pressure point through which the truth will reveal itself. Hastings stared. Then if neither of them stole it, who did? Poirot turned, slowly, deliberately, his gaze settling on the one person who had hovered at the periphery of every conversation, listening more than speaking, taking notes, observing reactions, always near the drama, but never appearing to shape it. Miss Eliza Trent stiffened. Her hand closed reflexively around her notebook. Poirot approached her with the same gentleness he had shown others, gentleness that nonetheless pressed like a weight. Mademoiselle Trent, he said softly, it is time the performance ended. She forced a scoff. Performance, don't be absurd. I am a journalist. I report, that is all. Poirot tilted his head. A journalist who arrived before the doors opened, a journalist who knew precisely where to stand to see every angle, a journalist who watched the lighting adjustments earlier today. He paused, despite having no reason to be near the staff corridors at all. She said nothing. Poirot continued, You used your press credentials to slip through areas closed to guests. You observed procedures that only the staff should have witnessed, and you timed the scepter's disappearance perfectly, during the moment when all eyes faced the stage for the unveiling. Miss Trent's throat moved, but no sound emerged. Poirot held up the brass tag discovered in the alcove. A17B. You wrote an article last year about the theft of antiquities in Athens. You know how cataloguing works. You knew precisely which crate the scepter occupied prior to installation. Hastings inhaled sharply. Poirot stepped closer. And the false clues? Too clumsy for a man like Weathers, too purposeful for a boy like Lyle, but perfect for someone who crafts narratives for a living, someone who understands that storytelling is the true art of misdirection. Miss Trent's grip on her notebook trembled violently now. You don't understand, she whispered. Poirot's eyes softened. Then help me. Why steal the scepter? Her breath shuddered. She stepped backward, colliding with a plinth. For a moment, she looked like someone caught between confession and flight. It wasn't for money, she said at last. It was for truth. The hall stirred. Poirot waited. Miss Trent's voice cracked. The museum has been suppressing provenance documents, selling artifacts under false histories. I've been investigating them for months. The scepter wasn't right. It wasn't what they claimed. I needed proof, so I planned to expose them. And so, Poirot said gently, you became a thief. She closed her eyes, only long enough to prove the deception. Poirot lowered his voice. And where is the scepter now? Miss Trent slowly opened her notebook, not to a blank page, but to a hollowed compartment beneath the paper. A cylindrical object lay inside, wrapped in cloth. The guests gasped. Hastings stared. Good Lord, she carried it the entire time. Poirot exhaled softly. Nearness provides safety, Hastings. No thief hides what they can cradle. Guards moved in, hesitant but firm. Poirot addressed Miss Trent with quiet finality. You wished to reveal one truth, mademoiselle, but you created another. Theft is still theft, no matter its intention. She bowed her head as the guards escorted her away. Poirot smoothed his cuffs, the hall slowly exhaling around him. And now, he murmured, order returns. The hall remained suspended in a breathless quiet long after Miss Trent disappeared behind the guarded door, the echoes of her confession still rippling through the air like a fading tremor. Some guests exchanged stunned glances, others whispered in disbelief, but most simply watched Poirot, waiting as though only he could place the final stone in the arch they had all just witnessed being built. Poirot, however, seemed in no hurry. He surveyed the room with a quiet, almost solemn gaze, then straightened his cuffs with that familiar gesture of restoring order where chaos had dared intrude. Hastings stood beside him, still processing the revelation. To think, Hastings murmured, that all of this, fear, misdirection, the scattered clues, they were crafted by a journalist, not a criminal mastermind. Poirot nodded gently. Criminality, mon ami, is not measured solely by experience. It is measured by need, by the desperation of a soul determined to prove itself righteous. He glanced toward the staff corridor. In Mademoiselle Trent, we saw a woman who wrapped herself in indignation as justification. She believed she served truth, but in doing so, she betrayed it. Dr. Ainsworth approached hesitantly, her composure shaken yet steadier than before. Monsieur Poirot, she said softly, the museum owes you, well, everything. I cannot imagine how we would have uncovered this without you. Poirot inclined his head. The museum, mademoiselle, must examine not how the scepter was stolen, but how a deception of provenance was allowed to take root. That is a matter beyond my investigation. Ainsworth's cheeks flushed with shame. She accused us of falsifying history. That's absurd. Poirot looked at her with eyes that seemed to read past her words. Perhaps, or perhaps the truth lies somewhere between falsehood and misunderstanding. It is not for me to judge. My concern was theft, not politics. Chief Weathers, still held by two guards, but now calmer, cleared his throat. Poirot, for what it's worth, I wasn't helping her. I was protecting the boy. He gestured weakly toward Lyle, who stood trembling once more, but with a softer fear this time, not of accusation, but of relief. Poirot nodded. I know, monsieur. Your loyalty to your staff, though misguided tonight, was genuine. You feared that the wrong person would suffer under suspicion, especially one so vulnerable. Hastings frowned. But why not simply tell us what you knew? Weathers shook his head. Because knowing and proving are different things. I suspected Miss Trent wandered where she shouldn't, but suspicion isn't evidence, and I feared the museum would bury the matter if I tried to raise it internally. I thought keeping Lyle away from trouble was the best I could do. Poirot sighed softly. A noble instinct, monsieur, but nobility does not absolve poor judgment. Weathers lowered his gaze, accepting the truth of that statement. Poirot then turned toward Lyle, who seemed smaller than ever beneath the weight of so many watching eyes. And you, monsieur, Poirot said kindly, must learn that fear is a poor adviser. It made you hide, it made you scatter false clues, and it nearly cost you far more dearly than honesty ever could. Tears welled in the young man's eyes. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just didn't want to be blamed again. Poirot placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Then let this be the lesson you carry. Strength is not in trembling, but in truth. The young man nodded, blinking rapidly, and Poirot stepped back. Gradually, the atmosphere in the hall began to settle. the sharp edges of panic smoothing into a quieter, contemplative calm. Guests whispered their conclusions, guards resumed positions of control, and Dr. Ainsworth gave instructions for the Aurelian scepter, finally recovered, to be placed under renewed security. Hastings exhaled deeply. Well, Poirot, I dare say that was one of your more twisting cases. A thief who wasn't a thief, a frightened boy who wasn't guilty, a security chief who wasn't corrupt, and a journalist who, well, who believed herself the hero of her own tale. Poirot finished. Such is often the danger with those who craft narratives. They forget that the truth is not written, it is revealed. Hastings smiled faintly. And you revealed it beautifully. Poirot gave a small shrug. Non, mon ami. I merely listened. People tell you everything if you understand how to hear the spaces between their words. He glanced toward the grand entrance now being unsealed. Come, Hastings. Our work here is done. They began walking toward the exit, weaving through the parted sea of guests who watched them go with admiration, or in some cases, awe. Poirot walked with hands clasped behind him, every step precise, measured, unhurried, an island of order restored to itself. Just before they reached the door, Hastings turned to him. Poirot, do you ever tire of it? These deceptions, these crimes, these moments when men and women reveal their darkest selves. Poirot paused, lifting his chin thoughtfully. Tear? No. Saddened, perhaps, but always reminded. Reminded of what? Hastings asked. Poirot smiled, softly, knowingly, that the smallest flaw in human character may lead to the greatest folly, and that a little grey cell, well nourished, must shine brightly against such shadows. Hastings chuckled. Trust you to end on philosophy. Poirot tapped his temple. It is not philosophy, mon ami. It is truth. They stepped out into the cool night air, the museum doors closing behind them with a soft, decisive click, like the final punctuation of a case resolved, a mystery concluded, and order once again restored in a world ever too eager for chaos. Poirot adjusted his hat. Now, Hastings, he said with a familiar twinkle, let us find a proper chocolate. Tonight we have earned it.